All right, good afternoon. I'm here with our good friend, Dr. Mark Charest. Just a reminder, we're not going to do our live Doctor is In this month because it's so close to holiday. So we're going to do a recorded version here. But Mark, I got to tell you, I'm pretty excited for this conversation. Let's start by jumping in. Like AbbVie is super aggressive and they're going out there paying a lot of money for these big companies, two different types, two different parts of their business. What are you seeing from this? This has to be some good news in general, but specifically for AbbVie, what does this mean for them?
Yeah, for sure, Jonathan. So it looks like, AbbVie has the Santa hat on early and made two multi-billion-dollar acquisitions, in the past couple of weeks here. And so, I think that, the big picture narrative is very consistent with what, we've been calling for some time, which is we're going to see more M&A, right? The big pharmas really need to replace top line growth. They're facing a record amount of branded drug exclusivity loss over the next 5 years. It's 150 to 200 billion dollars of branded revenue at risk. They're going to go out and do things. So in AbbVie's case, as you mentioned, they did an oncology deal by buying Immunogen. That was over a $10 billion acquisition for an antibody drug conjugate that has a couple of approvals, but it's going to be expanded into ovarian cancer, and there are high hopes for the a long duration life of that program. And then AbbVie, somewhat unusual, paid $8.7 billion for a kind of a phase two company called Cerevel. They have a number of different, CNS focused drugs in the pipeline, and none of these could even possibly be approved for a few more years, and they have some clinical data risk in front of them. So, some eyebrows are raised just around the risk profile of the asset. But if you look at, AbbVie's broader pipeline, one of their CNS drugs, Vraylar, goes off patent in the later part of the 2020s. And so, this acquisition, Jonathan, seems very clearly to be directed at replenishing the CNS portfolio of AbbVie, that's facing that very acute, kind of cliff. So, overall, hey, almost $20 billion in M&A in the month of December. That's an early Christmas present for investors.
Yeah, it sure is. Another one just happened today. AstraZeneca purchased Icosavax, a lot of bit smaller, but still pretty interesting. What can you tell us about that one?
Yeah, this deal, I think this one also fits very squarely in this, strategic motivated deal. So AstraZeneca is paying about $800 million upfront. This is also a phase two asset. And they just actually announced phase two data for their RSV vaccine candidate in conjunction with the acquisition announcement. So clearly AbbVie was, behind the curtain looking at the data, reviewing it before it was released. This happens from time to time. There's a contingent value right associated with this deal. It'll pay another few hundred million to get the total deal value to about $1.1 billion. Should the contingent value right be paid out. But AbbVie doesn't have an RSV vaccine. Merck and Pfizer were the leaders there. GSK and Pfizer both have recently approved and launched RSV vaccines that are doing quite well. Actually, GSK put up a great quarter, most recent quarter, on strength of their RSV vaccine. So I think AstraZeneca is looking forward to potentially joining this market, and they're going to have to develop a slightly differentiated product, which there's potential there, but that's what's behind this deal. Kind of a earlier strategic deal. Obviously, execution risk in front of it.
Gotcha. Well, let's do one more. This is a big week because finally, there's been a lot of talk of this, but Pfizer and Seattle Genetics looks like we're going to close the deal by the end of the week here. That's got to be good news or great news too.
For sure, right? So I think that it's good news on two main fronts. The first is, it survived without an FTC challenge. Just as a reminder, the deal was announced earlier in the year. FTC made a sort of an additional information request, which delayed the HSR waiting period expiration, which was announced to be December 11th. And actually, Pfizer announced today that the deal is going to close this week. So that's positive from a sentiment standpoint around FTC concerns, but it's also positive in the sense that that's $43 billion, and a lot of that capital is going to come back into the sector. So we're actually really looking forward to the redeployment. The good news is when you have a large kind of biotech takeout, the funds that hold the stock typically redeploy a major portion of that. So I think there's folks are speculating as to where that capital might go.
Yeah, good news for the sector in general. Good timing as well. Well, let's change gears real quick on that same vein, I suppose. We saw some gene editing based medicine get approved this week, which that's got to send a pretty good signal to the market that hey, maybe this FDA is being, good boys and nice to us this year. Maybe we've deserved this present that they've given us. What are your thoughts on that? What's that mean kind of going forward?
Yeah, absolutely, Jonathan. So it's a landmark approval. CRISPR Therapeutics announced the approval of their sickle cell disease-based gene editing therapy. It's just the first, drug approved in a major by the FDA that has gene editing technology associated with it.
Mhm.
So certainly, it's nice to see there are constructive regulators that are trying to shepherd through some of these leading edge biotechnology products through the regulatory process and get them over the goal line. So very good news from a standpoint of access to markets and sort of regulatory accommodation. Interesting, Jonathan. A competing gene therapy drug was also approved in the same day for sickle cell disease. So these are two competitive products. One relies on a gene editing solution, that was the one I mentioned, and there's a
Mhm.
second one approved that's a little more based on just using a gene therapy approach. The idea is you're manipulating the genetic material. There's just different ways to do it
Mm.
as part of the treatment. But to see both of them approved, kind of in tandem, really shows, I think the commitment of regulators to again get these things over the goal line, which I think is good news, right? I think as we look to the future, the complexity of drugs and drug products is only going up, and to have
Mm.
a clear regulatory pathway that investors can have confidence that will shepherd these things through is certainly a positive.
Yeah, well, let's keep going on that. So it sounds like our setup for the new year is pretty good. We've got big M&A deals coming through. We've got the FTC leaving these deals alone, which was a little bit worrisome earlier in the year. We have the FDA showing that, hey, they're willing to work with the market here or with the sector to try to approve good drugs. I have to assume that the setup is pretty good after the longest and deepest pullback we've ever seen in the market. What are your thoughts on where we're going?
Yeah, I think us and a lot of other folks are starting to get more constructive on 2024, right? And as you mentioned, the S&P Select Biotech Index, has been in a bear market for 12 quarters now. It seems like
Yeesh.
every time I say it, it's like, hey, is that really correct? And this is an index that's never been down 2 years in a row, let alone 12 quarters worth. And so, we're pretty optimistic that we're coming from a lowered and reset base. You mentioned sort of the M&A tailwinds that I think will persist and continue with us through the balance of next year. A constructive regulatory environment that can get even some of the more complex and leading edge innovative therapies over the goal line and transition to commercial products. There's a lot to like there, and so we think that there are a large number of companies that are set up for success. It won't be everybody in the space.
Mm.
So, I think we have to, be a little bit balanced here. This isn't going to be a sea raising all boats like we saw in the second half of 2020, early 2021. That was probably an over exuberant environment that, led to some of the pain that we've been feeling for the past couple of years. But, we think the setup, for companies that are going to develop differentiated products and can do so with a reasonable capital commitment, we think companies like that are going to generate a lot of value for shareholders and patients.
Well, you sound optimistic, which is a great way to head into the new year. Hopefully, you won't get beat up like it's been the last couple of years. Like 12 quarters seems just out of this world crazy for this market. But when it bounces back pretty quickly. If I understand the historical data pretty well, so that's
Absolutely.
good to
Well, and
know.
I guess one more point I think for folks to appreciate is that the relative performance of biotech to the broader market indices has also been record level of underperformance. And
Mm.
so, we think that, the setup for a mean reversion trade, is quite good. Again, we think the fundamentals are with us, certainly for, those companies that are going to develop differentiated assets with a reasonable capital footprint. And we think that, there's been a lot of hot money chasing a lot of, very expensive assets out in other parts of the market. We're coming from, the longest and deepest pullback in the history. And we think the setup, just in addition to the fundamental factors we touched on, but the mean reversion trade we think is going to be alive and well next year.
Yeah, well, we're hoping for it too. Well, thanks so much, Mark, as always, for your time. I hope that you have a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and you enjoy surfing on Christmas Day. We will not be surfing on Christmas Day in Omaha, but we'll be thinking of you out in the Omaha of the Atlantic Ocean over the holidays here.
Oh, appreciate that. Thanks, Jonathan. Happy holidays, everybody.
All right, take care. Have a good one. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you guys in January.